Hey. I am so excited to be jumping into another episode of Built Women Conversations. I pray that you are doing amazing. Again, I am your host, Alicia J. Kemper, and I'm so excited to just be able to facilitate these conversations as we are talking about women, women, right? All things women. As we're jumping into our new episode, I was thinking again about I did some research, y'all. So Um, I did some research because I just wanted to know, like in the search engine, what would be like the number one thing that like most women deal with, like beyond race, beyond age, like what would be like the biggest thing that most women deal with? And do you know that 80% or more of women, like regardless of like country, all of that stuff was insecurity and rejection. Yes. Most women constantly deal with insecurity. And I get it. We talked about this before in like one of our other episodes that like the reality is that um there is always with women because of like I believe that God gave us this innate thing with beauty. Like even when you think about um when Satan came and he presented whatever he presented to Eve in the garden, right? One of the things that it says is that she saw that it was pleasing to the eyes, right? So we have this thing with beauty, but I think that sometimes it is the joy of it is the joy. Sometimes beauty can be our enemy when our identity is in it. Like the truth of it is, God never meant for beauty to become the avenue in which we are constantly comparing ourselves, right? So, no matter how long our hair is, it could be longer. No matter how pretty we are, we could be prettier. No matter how small we are, we could be smaller, right? Like, and even if there are areas where there's a need for improvement, like maybe we want to be healthier, or maybe we want to lose weight, or, maybe we want to take better care of our hair, like these improvements were never designed for us to live in a place like we're not enough. It's just acknowledging that we could do better, right? We could take care of it. But the reality is that sometimes beauty becomes our enemy because we get into this constant cycle of comparing to the next woman, you know and it's just dangerous. Like it is genuinely dangerous, right? So to be honest with you, it was not a shock to me when I realized like that makes sense. Like because if I be honest with you guys, like the truth of it is like that is probably something I've struggled with my entire life, right? And of course I know that the root of that struggle began with what I dealt with my father. Like that's the reason why, like just like a side note, when it comes to us as intercessors, like that's why it's so important that um we understand why we need to be praying concerning the issue with fatherlessness, or the issues with fathers being in the home but they're not present. Because the truth of it is that the makeup of the family was God did design man to help shape identity. He gave woman has a part in it, but we nurture more than we shape, right? And we both have the ability to do it, but there is just something different when man cultivates identity in their children. And so when you have daughters, and we know that affects conversation is about women, about girls. Um, but when we have absentee fathers in the home, or fathers that are not necessarily involved, then you have daughters that are trying to figure out their identity on their own. And it's not shaped by a loving father that is constantly speaking into that girl's worth, speaking into that daughter's value, or constantly speaking into the kind of woman that she designs to be. And howbeit, it's even worse if that young lady is in a home with a man that objectifies women, with a man that belittles women. It's a dangerous thing. And so just side note, even when you think about intercession, that's why it's so important that we are praying concerning the mountain of influence of family, because fatherlessness is probably one of the greatest culprits behind of what we deal with in society, because God never created the family unit to be absent a man. And the truth of it is nothing irks me more when I hear this idea of I'm both mother and father. Like, no, you're not. God didn't create you to be both, right? You can only be who God created you to be, and allow what the word of God says, that if that father is absent, then he can be a father to the fatherless. And I'm a living witness that God can be a father to the fatherless, because he fathered me. And the truth of it is, so much of the orphan that I struggled with was broken out of my life because of the love of God as a father to me. But it's why it's so important that it's dealt with. And so I am not absent of why insecurity and rejection has been such a struggle in my life, because of, what I endured by the hands of my father. And that void of feeling like I wasn't worth loving as a daughter, and the only thing that I was worth was being objectified for my body, for my beauty, and for what was in between my legs, created a cycle in my life that I had to break free from. And it wasn't the quantity of men that I slept with, it was the quality, right? It was lowering my standard and not being seen. And the reality is in the situations when a quality man showed up, I rejected them because I did not understand me being loved for just who I was, right? It had to be what I could offer. And so it can be such a cycle, and culture doesn't help with that, right? We see it in the music that's produced, we hear it, we see it on television, we see it objectified through every commercial that we see. And it's a constant message that we are not enough, right? And when you start adding race to that, then it gets worse, because there are certain races in our culture that are erected as better than the other. And so society often measures a woman's beauty, her size, and all that culturally based off of race, when the reality is just the way you were made and created. Like, I think about this all the time when I went in the military. When I went into the military, and I had to take my physical training test, I failed it every single time. And if I actually built my worth based off of the standard of what that physical training test says, based off of my height, what weight I should have been, and all of that, I would have constantly thought myself to be overweight. But when they would go in to tape me, my wrists, my neck, my waist, and all of that, I always fell in that in that position where I wasn't overweight. But the reality is, I come from a family of women with breasts and hips, and we're thick and all of that good stuff. And so it's crazy for me to compare myself to another woman, but I did. I would, because there was such this idea that smaller was better, right? And I never could, for a time period, see that the way that God made me was fearfully and wonderfully made. It was beautiful. And I needed to learn to accept that. And it probably has been one of the greatest missions for me with my daughters, for them to love them the way. I have one daughter that is, tall, and she's slender but thick in the waist. I have another daughter that is a little bit shorter, and she is kind of hourglassy. And they're both beautiful, and they both present the beauty of a woman. But it is teaching them that it is never to be compared to, but it is learning to coexist with one another and accept and love each other for what we bring to the table as women, and to know that that is not something to be competed with. And I just believe that that is something that God is I believe that God is dealing with that in this generation. I remember as I was coming out of 2023 to 2024, the Lord began to whisper to me that this was the decade of destiny for many women, because the Lord was speaking into the lives of so many women and bringing them out of this place of obscurity, out of this place of the cave, where we've been hiding, right? It's like, there's nothing wrong with being the secretary on the job. So please hear what I'm saying. If that's what you are called to do, and that's what you should be doing, then you should 100% be it. Because remember, I'm not talking about comparison, but I'm talking about what we have settled for, things that we know is actually less than what God has said. When we have chosen to be doormats instead of door openers, where we have settled to be silent in the room when our voice is needed. It is at the same level of pride. The person that chooses to be arrogant and believe themselves to be more than what God has said they are called to be. Just as it is to the person that refuses to accept what God is saying because they keep choosing to be less than that. Like, it's not the will of God. It's not the will of God for either one. And the truth of the matter, it's pride, because pride declares it doesn't matter what God says, this is what I am. So that's whether that's above the thing that God is saying you should be or less than. And it's like we have to own that. That's the reason why there is no comparing the woman that is the homemaker, that is a stay-at-home mom that takes care of the kids and takes care of the house. She is no less than the woman that is a corporate executive in a boardroom. Because the truth of the matter is that it is all about understanding who God called and created you to be. Understanding what your purpose is in the earth. And for as long as you are walking out that purpose, then you are fully walking out who God called you to be. And I know, like, that is probably different from what you've heard, because sometimes we downplay the stay-at-home mom. And in other circles, they bash the corporate executive. They bash the woman leader in ministry. They bash the woman business because God didn't make that. But the reality is that we have to go back to Genesis to understand what God was saying about male and female. And when God made male and female, he expected them both to have dominion, both to subdue, to both walk in his express image and likeness in the earth. And the reality is there is no one standard for either gender. All men are not called to be corporate executives, just like all women are not. And a man that is a stay-at-home father is not of less stature than the man that is a corporate executive. And the same thing goes for us as women. But one of the things that, looking at this research and seeing that over 80% of women, regardless of their financial, social status, race, or age, 80% of all women in the United States of America and across the globe struggles with insecurity is a problem. Because insecurity will always point to comparison. It will always say, I am not enough to stand in the room. And that's not the will of God for any of us as women. And I'm telling you, it is something that I have had to overcome in my life constantly. You belong here. Your voice matters. And not from an arrogant place where I'm going off or I'm screaming or hollering, because when I first began to try to discover and find my voice, I was rude. Come on, let me just be honest. Let me be honest. I was the angry Black woman. But it was because I had lived so long without my voice that I just didn't have a revelation that I was a child of God. I didn't have the revelation that I was an heir and a joint heir with Christ Jesus, which meant I wasn't begging for anyone to give me my voice. I wasn't pleading for anyone to hear me. It was me standing up and just being who God called me to be. And in that time of my life, I didn't understand that. And so it was like a war, I'm you're going to hear me, and that's just not the will of God. And it's not the desire that God has for you. God doesn't want you to be rude or angry. God just wants you to understand and accept that he has given you a voice, and your voice matters in the room. And he wants you to be heard. And in the moment where you get an opportunity to speak up, that you speak up. And that even means that sometimes in speaking up, you may have to stand up to the bully that is constantly shutting your voice down, setting up to the person that demands you to be a doormat. And the truth of the matter is that person could be male or female. Because sometimes there are women that are insecure, but their insecurity comes off like bullying, the same way there is as men with men. One of the things that I think is probably one of the most amazing things when I think about our relationship with God is when Jesus is there in like Matthew 22 or so, and they say, Teacher, what is the greatest commandment? And I think to myself, like, he could have said like a million things. Like, he could have said, Be ye holy, because I am holy. And we know that the word of God tells us that. He could have said tithes and offerings, and we know that that's something God is asking us to do. But all the commandments and all of the things that Jesus could have said was the greatest commandment. He says the greatest commandment, the first, is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength, like all of you. And then he said the second one is just as important. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. So it's like of all the things that the Lord could have said mattered, he says, love me, love yourself, love your neighbor. I believe that it's a revelation for us as women, because I believe that one of the things that God is pushing us into as women is to understand that all of your degrees are great. All of the babies are wonderful. The marriage, it's the will of God. But if we do all of that and we have minus out love, we have missed the greatest command that God has. And this is the real truth. Our husbands don't even get the best version of ourselves because we lack that love thing with God. And so we never get an opportunity to experience God's love and how that love affects our self-image. And because we don't get that love that affects our self-image, that our husbands are getting fragments of the love that they really should have. Our children are getting fragments of the love that they really should have. Because there are so many components to love. I mean, when you study the word love in the Bible, you have agape love, right? So we know that's that unconditional love. But you have that phileo love. That's that brotherly love. You have eros, right? You have the eros love, and that's the erotic, that's romantic love. There's another one, I think it's like stangy love. I'm trying to remember the way you pronounce it, but that is a love that is like family love, right? There's all these components of love that God desires for us to have the ability to experience. And when we don't love God, we never experience what it's like to really be loved. And in that, we don't find ourselves. And if we don't truly find ourselves in the love of God, then everything and everyone else around us is getting fragments of who we're really designed to be. And so we live the entirety of our life insecure. And like, this is truth, because this is tough. Do you know something? Like, come on, we're having like a built woman conversation, right? This is grown folk conversation. Like, this is us being honest. There is more agitating and irking to me as a single woman to enter into a space where that's an event, or I've invited over to someone's house or to a dinner, and there's an insecure married woman that thinks all I'm doing is thinking about her husband, and it's all this, like, nothing agitates me more, because number one, because of your insecurity, you're lessening my value. Because you're thinking that number one, you think my whole life evolves around having a man. And it doesn't. I'm not thinking about your husband, right? It's number one. Number two, it's devaluing to me that you would think that all I care about is, that I would lessen myself to want to try to holler at a married man. right? Three, it's degrading to you because it's saying you're not enough. And I realize that there are women out there that they do it. They're always after somebody's husband. They're always after somebody's man. But it is sad when women are having to, I have to deal with that foolishness when at the end of the day, I'm not that woman. And though there may be women out there, like I'm not like that. And I want to be able to come to this dinner. I want to be able to come to this event. I want to be able to be a part of this church. I want to be able to be on this job without having to feel like you always think I'm after your man. Like, ain't nobody thinking about your husband. But the reality is that's what insecurity does. And there are so many women that cannot cultivate healthy friendships because of the spirit of competition. You know, like if a woman is friends with you, you have to always lead. Your voice has to always be the loudest voice in the room. Like there is no real friendship, right? We bully one another and it's silly, y'all. It's silly. And I'm telling you, hear it from a single woman to those of y'all that are listening on here that are married. Like we have to do better with that. And that's the women dating. Like the reality is there are women out there who are not right, right? And they need to heal. They need to deal with their insecurity because that's why they're always after somebody else's man to prove that they're enough. But my God, let a woman show her character, right? Let there be something that is visibly seen that makes you realize that that might be something you need to check. You don't have to be insecure about it. You can just check it. But the reality is every woman having to walk on eggshells around you because maybe you're with a man that has a roaming eye or you're just insecure. And we have to deal with that. Because the reality is, it's everyone around you pays for that insecurity. No one ever wants to come around because they know what they got to deal with from you. And it's just absolutely, it's unfair to you as the woman, and it's unfair to the woman that has to deal with it. God wants us as women to really face our insecurities. And truly, the most honest way that we can do it is not from liposuction, not from weight loss surgery, not from piling a bunch of makeup on our face, not from a new hairstyle, not from putting on our jeans a little bit tighter. No, if we're going to deal with our insecurities as women and fully be who God is calling us to be, we have to go back to the source that created us. I taught this in our last season. Last season, I did a few episodes on divorce and really helping women navigate coming out of divorce. And one of the things I said was this, is that we have to remember that when God built the woman, it was God could have left the man awake when he took the rib out of Adam and he shaped the woman. He could have left the man awake to have a say so about how he made the woman, but God allowed Adam to be asleep because that identity of that woman was not up to Adam, it was up to God. When the Lord allowed Adam's voice to come in was when it came to her being wife, which teaches us the principle that in a home, God is calling a man not to rule his wife, but to lead her. And that there is an expansion to a woman's identity when she goes from woman to wife. But truly being a wife should be built on the security of being a wife, should be built on the security of your identity as woman. And that can only be built in God's presence. When we allow a man or someone else, a woman, people to shape our identity as woman, to tell us who we are created to be and what we are designed to do. The only effect of that is insecurity. Because you're not secure, because you're being you were not created to be. So if we want to deal with the rejection, if we want to deal with this insecurity, we've got to go back to the source of our creation. And that is God. That is God. That is absolutely God. He built you in his presence. He shaped you with strength. He wove you with grace. He fashioned you with beauty. Come on. He poured into you wisdom. If we're going to deal with our insecurity, we've got to go back to the source. of who God created you to be. It is the Lord who made you woman, built you in his presence. First encounter that every woman, the first encounter a woman ever had was the presence of God. And if we're going to get to the place where we love ourselves the way that God is asking for us to love ourselves, and we've got to get back into his presence. All right, y'all? We got to get back to the source of the one that created us. I know. But I know that the more that you yield to God and you allow him to deal with that, and the truth of the matter is what we're doing right now is good too. It's having healthy conversation, healthy dialogue, where we really do confront and deal and be honest with some of the stuff that we're dealing with, right? Where we do what we talked about, we've talked about before, taking off that mask, breaking that clay mask, and being real about our struggles, right? I can be honest about me struggling with false humility, struggling with living beneath my who God created me to be. That's never been the will of God. But I can be honest with that because of real dialogue and having to look myself in the mirror and accept you're living beneath who God created you to be, and you need to deal with that. And that's not the will of God. Because the truth of the matter is, David said this, and we're in our podcast, this episode on this. David begins to talk about being shaped in his mother's womb and how he's shaped and fearfully and wonderfully made. And it begins to talk about how his life was written in the book of God. And it reveals to us that in the life of each one of us, our lives have been written in the book of God. The Bible even talks about that in the courts of heaven, when the courts go in sessions, the books are opened up. And it begins to all of these things are revealing to us. Even Job talks about it. It begins to reveal to us that God has written our life. He knows exactly the purpose he created us for. And when insecurity and rejection is standing in the way, when false humility is there, when arrogance is present, then there is a part of our purpose, our calling, our identity we are not walking out. There's a part of our voice that is muted, that is shut down, that is silenced, which means that by the time we leave this earth and lay in our grave, there will still be things that we have not accomplished, because there are parts of us that we chose to dim our light because we were afraid to shine. And I need you to understand today that the Bible declares that God is the Father of lights. And if he be the Father of lights, then my dears, we are daughters of light. And it is God's desire for you to shine, and to shine fully, completely, and confidently in whatever that role is. That role is maybe mother. That role may be wife. That role may be corporate executive. That role may be entrepreneur, business owner. That role may be author, blogger, daughter, sister, girlfriend, whatever it is. Whatever it is, your station in life was never meant to give you identity. It's just a part of the things that make up the purpose that God has created you to do. Whether single or married, neither one of them makes you lesser or better. It's all about the purpose that God has called you to. And when we choose to no longer dim our light and to step fully into who God is calling us to be, that's when we arise as the built women that God calls us to be. And we begin to see the strength, the grace, the wisdom, and the beauty that God has placed in us truly unfold the way that he's designed it to be. I want you to know today that God has called you to shine. And my prayer today is that as you in this podcast with me, today's episode with me today, is that you would choose to shine as the daughters that God has called you to be, and to step into this decade of destiny fully as a woman that God created you to be. And that the world will experience your voice in ways and in measures that you can imagine, because you made a decision to not live beneath or outside of who God created you to be, but you are fully accepting that I am woman. Hear me roar. Oh man, how good it was to be on here with you on today. Until we connect again, God bless.